Hey, welcome back. Today I'm just gonna do a deck text slash deck list on my Grixis control slash midrange deck, and kind of go over some cards choices, talk about some cards and the idea of the deck, and play it out. So this is more or less just an experimental deck. I haven't really actually tested any of this deck out. Granted, it's based off of a skeleton deck, or a skeleton of a deck that I used to play um, before I started my little Esper journey through the Mythic ranks. Um, but yeah, so pretty basic idea here is to um, play as many cards as we can a turn, and then just dump as many of those cards into the grave, and then we'll have one of two paths to go here. We'll either play Croxah from or escape Croxah from the grave to try to um, bring him out, and be a threat on board. Or if we don't see him, we have the Boluses to back him up. Kind of small thing about myself is I really like Bolus or Nicol Bolus as a character in Planeswalker and Magic. He's essentially the reason why I kind of got into Magic. I kind of saw him a couple years ago and thought he was, oh, this is a really cool looking dragon, and he's a bit of an edge lord and everything. But yeah, he's pretty cool. Kind of reminds me of like the kind of the iconic Charizard and Blue Eyes White Dragon of Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon. And so yeah, that's why I play Grixis and why I usually main Grixis colors to play with. So yeah, let's go ahead and go over some card choices, and I'll kind of talk about my thoughts on some of the choices and go from there. So the reason why I'm taking this deck up again is Innistrad was released. It was a Midnight Hunt, and a couple cool cards came out of that that I thought would make my previous version of this deck a little bit better, and I'm gonna try it out. So first card I want to talk about is Consider. So Consider is a pretty cool cantrip here. It's kind of like Opt, um, and a couple of other good cantrips. When we used to have Brainstorm in the format before that got suspended, and that was the go-to. But the only other card that's similar to that would be Opt. I think at least instant speed. Um, so Consider here is essentially Surveil and then draw a card. The reason why I don't think they wanted to print the keyword Surveil on the card anymore was to avoid it comboing with the Surveil keywords in general. Kind of like with, I want to say, was it Disinformation Campaign and Thought Rager and Discovery, and those the mirror cards, and a couple of other creatures that have the Surveil keyword on it. Yeah, they one mana to Surveil would be pretty synergetic and pretty good with those creatures and cards in general. And so I think they just want to avoid that and not limit their design space in the future. Because if they design more cards with Surveil synergy, they may have to consider they may have to actually consider banning this card or something if it gets too good. I mean, it's not a ban-worthy card, but they probably want to avoid having a really dominant sort of keyword in the format. So they just literally printed out the effect of Surveil without it surveilling anything in that sense. So cool card. Cool thing about this card is that for 1 mana and for 1 blue, we essentially can load our graveyards with 2 cards, which doesn't seem like much, but in this, well, at least in the historic, since we don't have really good ways to put cards in our graveyards for essentially for free, we literally have to play like low mana cards or cantrips and things like that to kind of try to load up our graveyards. In modern legacy, you have all the fetch lands available to you. Here, we're stuck with just the Fable passage, and Fable is cool and all, but honestly, it it should have been something like Prismatic Vista or something instead. I guess Prismatic Vista would be a little too good too, but um, yeah, Fables are our only real way to kind of load our graveyard for free. Um, for to try to escape, Croxah, and so consider loading 2 cards in the graveyard. It's pretty good for 1 mana. And yeah, same thing here. It's these cards just interact and load a graveyard, and that's essentially the entire idea of the deck in general, is to I guess mid-range or tempo out our opponent while putting stuff into the graveyard, drawing our cards, just doing all that stuff, while eventually getting to the mid-range slash or mid-game or end game, and at that point we'll be casting Croxah for value, and in case we run out of steam or something, or if we need to push for damage or for game. Croxah is a great card to finish the game with. He deals a lot of damage. It's hard to block. He's always doing something. So he's a really good card, and I really do like Croxah. In case in the event we don't see Croxah, we have the Boluses as sort of our backup plan, and our other immediate threats that our opponent has to deal with. The numbers can probably be swapped around a little bit. I mean, I'm just playing 4 or 3 because I just like consistency. Granted, they may clog your hand because they are legendary, but I haven't had that problem too many times, and we should be okay with these numbers. So I'm gonna say this particular deck is more of a mid-range deck versus a control deck, because essentially, like I mentioned earlier, we're playing a lot of cards on the curb to load our graveyard. Plenty of interaction, plenty of draw cards, and towards turn 4 and 5, that's when we'll be dropping our threats, and in many format, I guess, or at least in historic, turn 4 and 5 can be considered the mid game, versus other formats like Modern or Legacy. Your mid game is like on turn 2 or 3. In Vintage it's turn 1 or 2. It's all depends on how fast your format is, and I guess that definition can kind of shift. But yeah, here the turn 4 and 5 and onwards can be mid to late game. That's fine. We're not too worried about getting completely steamrolled. So in terms of card choices, because I'm playing mid range, I want to be tapping out every turn to kind of play my threats, to get value off of my cards. So I'm not really playing too many counter spells, just some, just to protect ourselves from the occasional top decks and to kind of slow our opponent down. But we don't want to be we don't want to be like Esper control or Jeskai, where we're just leaving our mana open all the time. We're not really doing anything on our turn. We're playing on our opponent's turn. Being Grixis, we need to be playing on our turn, and so we're most likely going to be tapping our mana, and so we won't have that much mana left up to make counter spells that particularly useful. But we'll still have a couple here. That way, if we do play a counter spell, or we do play something like Memory Lapse on our opponent, they will kind of be they'll always be on kind of like on alert if we have blue mana open. So that way, if they don't see any counter spells, they're just gonna think, oh, he has mana open. He's never, if he haven't seen any counter spell, we can just do whatever we want, and kind of want to avoid that. So just a few counter spells, just gotta psych them out, and just Memory Lapse is just good in general. One search for Escanta. Since we like I mentioned, this card is here to essentially be kind of like our 25th land, because I'm playing 24 lands in this particular deck. Could it be our 25th land slash sort of a small engine to put cards into the graveyard? And in it itself, if we do flip it, it's cool. You search a card, but we're not going to really be doing that searching. Unlike my Esper control deck, where we can have our mana untap, and we can use Big Teferi to untap stuff and retap it to to search or make tokens and stuff like that. In this deck, we don't really have that luxury, and so I don't think more than one Search of Skanta is really super necessary. But yeah, and so we'll just go ahead and move on. The next coolest card here is the Infernal Graphs. Probably one of the best black removal spells printed to date, and it even beats some of the older black removal spell. There's really no downside to this card, other than you losing 2 life, but you have 20 life to work with, and life is a resource, so pretty good. It's instant speed, um, not very restrictive casting cost. Destroy any target creature early game, late game. Yeah, just a really good card in general. Only downside is it doesn't hit Planeswalker, unlike Murderous Rider. But upside is it's easier to cast. A Murderous Rider is 2 black and colorless, and can be a little slow and a little restrictive to cast. So this card, I think you can just play it whenever, late game, early game. It doesn't really matter. It's just really good. So yeah, trying out 2 copies for now. Here we have Drown and Lock. We are forcing our opponents to discard a lot. So Drown and Lock is a very versatile card. Not very restrictive casting costs. So I play Modern, and in Modern I try out Counterspell in my Grixis deck, and it's a little difficult to cast, especially getting 2 blue mana on turn 2. Kind of difficult, even with all the fetch lands. I just noticed that it's pretty difficult, which is why I love. I also love Memory Lapse, because it's not very restrictive. It's just 1 blue and colorless, really good. And so same idea here is that they're versatile cards, not too restrictive in terms of casting costs. Great overall. Only downside of Drown is if we're playing graveyard removal. When we side deck, it's not going to be as strong. Historic is a lot slower format. People aren't usually dumping too many cards in their graveyard, save for Jeskai or a cycling deck or something. So sometimes Drown and Lock can be a dead card. It can be really slow, really sometimes doesn't do anything. And so I think 2 is a good number. You want to see it, and you want to have multiple copies of it, but you don't want to open up with 3 or 4 in your hand and early game, and you're just gonna have a bad day because your hand's unplayable and you're just clogged up on this. Next good card is Expressive Liberation. Really good, especially with my 1 mana lineup here. There's a very good argument for even upping this to 3 or 4 even, because you do have the ability to cast some of these cards here, and if not, you're already exiling your lands to play them. But I'm just gonna try out 2, see how I like it. If I really like it, I might up it to 2. Maybe upped it to 3. I don't know about playing 4, because the 4 is a little can get a little cloggy, but it's more or less a turn 3 card. It's not really a turn 2 card. So that's just the only thing about it is that. But digging 3 cards deep into your deck for what you need is always good. Here we have Croxah. I think 2 Croxah is okay. You have 2, 1 kind of as a spare, and 1 as well, what I mean by that is if your opponent removes 1 somehow from your graveyard to exile it with Cling the Dust or something, at least you have a second spare 1 to play. I used to play 3, and sometimes I kind of didn't like it because when you're top decking this card, it's not that great, especially if you already have Croxahs in your graveyard, or your opponent doesn't have a hand anymore, something like that. Then having too many Croxahs can weigh your hand down. In other formats, like Modern or Pioneer, you have discard outlets, which is great. For example, you have Baby Jace, which you draw 1, discard 1, and in that format you could probably up the Croxah. But even then, I don't think you really need more than 2, unless you're like a Rakdos aggro deck, Aristocrats or something like that. Then you might want to play 3 or 4 copies of this. But in this particular build, I think 2 copies is okay. Here is a card I absolutely love and play in my Esper deck and in my modern deck too. Well, not my Grixis control modern deck, but my Esper modern deck, which I'm currently still in the middle of building. But um, Archbase Charm is just really versatile. It really does everything you need it to do. Um, it's just extremely restrictive, especially in 3 colors, and that's just something you kind of have to deal with. Um, in this particular deck, I used to play Narset. Narset's a great card, but only problem is just like with, well, not really, but in my Esper deck, she serves a purpose of being able to fetch a turn 4, a turn 5 card, or something like that, like a sweeper or something else, and or a counter spell. Here in this particular deck, since I'm not really playing any sweepers at all, I'm trying to be mid-range, so I'm dropping threats on 4 and 5 rather than trying to sweep my opponents to drop planeswalkers. I don't think she's going to serve too great of a purpose. And also, I'm playing, I think it was 7 creatures or so, which still, not a lot of creatures, but sometimes she can whiff, and it does kind of suck when you do whiff with her. And she's also kind of not too great against aggro decks. Obviously, in this particular format, there's not that much drawing unless you're playing against other control decks. Because aggro, they don't really draw. They're kind of just playing cards from their hand. If they are aggro, they might have cards that are playing from their top of their deck, or Coco's Command, or Impulse drawing. So Narset doesn't really stop those. Narset does hurt combo decks, decks that are playing Faithless Looting. And she was obviously a lot better when Brainstorm was in the format. I can't remember how many times I have a Narset with 1 loyalty left on the board, just sitting there. My opponent decides to Brainstorm on their turn, or even my turn, and it just sucks. I did it too, maybe once or twice, but like you're just discarding her. You're not really you're negging yourself 3 or 4 cards because Narset's just on the board, and people forget that, and Brainstorm draws the cards, and so that was good. That's why I used to use Narset for, but since Brainstorm's out of the format, don't think she's super necessary. I still play it in my Esper deck, different idea there, but in here in Grixis, I don't think she's needed. So trying out just 2 copies. 3 and 4 copies would be too much, and even at 2 copies, I don't know if I'll even like it. There's an argument to play more Expressive Liberation versus Archmage Charm. Expressive is essentially drawing 2 cards. Same idea here. Less restrictive to cast. One thing I do like about Archmage Charm is stealing things or countering things, which Expressive doesn't really do. So we'll try it out. We'll see how it works. So the next 2 cards, you could argue that you can use maybe 3 Kolagins or more Prismaria. It's kind of like for me, just an experiment. At one point, I was liking Prismaria with Narset, because you can force your opponent to try to draw 2 cards, and then they just end up discarding 2 cards because you have Narset on the board. There's some synergy behind that. In this particular deck, or even the deck skeleton I was using before, it was also for us to draw cards and discard our lands and things like that, and feed the Croxah in the grave, or to kind of fix our mana with the artifacts. Sometimes you play this on turn 3, and then you're able to drop the Bolus on turn 4, which is pretty cool. That most people aren't going to be able to answer a Bolus on turn 4, especially if their board's cleared up and stuff like that. And not many people are playing anything that is going to be removing Planeswalker. Planeswalkers aren't too great in a lot of formats, namely because too much aggro. By the time you drop your expensive 5 or 4 mana or 6 mana Planeswalker, you have to deal with your opponent's board, and they're just gonna attack over it. So I think in Historic it's fine. It's a little bit of a slower format, for an expensive Planewalker like Bolus to work out in. Kolagins, same idea kinda, but this time you're trying to bring back some of your stuff. Kinda, I guess you want to mostly bring back the Think of Bolus if you can, or forcing your opponent to discard a card, destroying stuff, pinging stuff for 2 damage. Yeah, overall, really good card. I don't think he's or Colgan's this great in Historic. Not too many people play Artifact. I play 3 of this in my Grixis control in Modern, and it does a lot more work there. But here, I don't think 3 would do too well, and so I opt for 2 and 1, and just to see how that works out. And so far in my other builds, they've worked okay. So in terms of my threats here, 4 Bolus can get a little cloggy in your opening hand sometimes, but I always like just seeing him and playing him and having my opponent try to deal with it. Um, and even in like Modern, the only real effective way of dealing with Bolus here is with Fatal Push. You can't really bolt this thing. You can't really do things like that, and so he's always trying to trade for 2 cards for 1. He drops in, opponent discards a card. Maybe he has to play another card to try to kill it, or maybe 2 cards to even kill it. So Bolus always good. Always love the card, and if you do get the chance to flip him, great. Most of the time when you do get the chance to flip him, the game's already going to be over. Your opponent's too far behind to come back from that. And a little bit of synergy with him is when you flip him, you can also revive the big Bolus if he's in your graveyard. Having 7 mana to have 2 big planeswalker that your opponent has to deal with, pretty game winning, and pretty good in general. So big Bolus, probably the best 5 mana planeswalker in the game, because he's the only planeswalker I believe that can +2, just upticking. There's you drawing a card, your opponent exiling a card. Only problem with him is he's very mana restrictive, being 3 black, red, blue. The triple black, even in a deck that's dedicated on playing a lot of black mana resource to try to drop this out, there's been times where I just couldn't cast him. So you could probably put this down to 2. You only really need to drop 1 or 2 to kind of push the game in your favor, anyways. But I like the option of having 3, and sometimes I just use him as a 5-mana removal. Obviously, that's not too great, but the option is there. His static ability of being able to copy other planeswalker abilities hasn't always been that great, because most of the time your +1 is better than any other planeswalker that's on the board, unless you have like an Ugin or like a Karn Liberator or something like that, where you can like get 4 or 5 loyalties, just by upticking or something like that. Then cool, great, copy that. But otherwise, your +1's good enough. Last card here is Torrential Gearhulk. He's kind of just a random card. I kind of want to test him out just to see how he does. I mean, he is a big threat. 6 mana is pretty expensive, and we're not really playing a true control deck. But why not? Let's try one out. We do have a couple instances that he can get some pretty good value out of. Archbase Charms, the commands. We do have laps and all that, so that's pretty good. Same thing here. You obviously don't want to be Torrential Gearhulking and casting a Consider or a Fatal, but the option's there. Obviously, if we had Snapcaster or something in this format, definitely would choose Snapcaster over Gearhulk. But 5/6 body with that can potentially counter, not bad, pretty good. I mean, in my Esper deck, this is the card I had the hardest time dealing with, mainly because being 6 mana, my Fatal's not killing it. I have to like Teferi it away or something like that, shuffle it, and they get to recast it, and yeah, it goes downhill when they cast a Torrential and you just have no answer for it, and it's at least from my experience. So I just want to try them out. Granted, Infernal Graphs is here to kind of help us tackle that particular issue. In terms of my actual Esper deck, maybe I'll add this in instead of playing the expensive Belful's Mastery. I like Belful's, it's the combos with the Narset, but it is expensive, and not too many people are playing Planeswalkers except for against just other Jeskai decks or other Esper decks, and maybe a Grixis control here or there. In terms of land, 24 lands. Probably could cut a land down. Probably could cut the Sulfurous and add like another Expressive to kind of get the rest of our lands. But playing Arena for so long, I there's times where I played 24, 25, 26 lands, and I would see a one land hand and have to mulligan again. And so I kind of just playing the 24 lands here, kind of just the basic number of lands that I need to get this deck to function. It's a pretty low curve. Let's see where we're sitting at. We're sitting at 2.4, so we need on the average, of 2 lands in our hand to get the deck to start, moving around and doing things. Our 4th and 5th land drops are pretty important too. If we don't have our 4th land, we're gonna be stuck just playing sort of a bad control deck because we need to hit our 4th land in order to Croxah or to drop the Ravager on their turn. And so yeah, just playing 24, play it safe. The algorithm in Arena is not that great. I think the way it works is it draws you 2 hands, and then I think it selects the best hand and gives you that hand, and then you can decide to mulligan or not. I think that's how it works, or at least that's what I heard how it works, but I don't know. In best of 1, that's what they do, but in best of 3, I don't think it does that. In best of 3, you kind of have to suck it up and either mulligan or do whatever. In terms of our side deck, pretty basic. Since I haven't actually tested this deck out, I don't know what to add in, what to take out. It's kind of a toss-up between what I know works and what I am going to experiment with. So Inquisition, I always like Inquisition. Sometimes I take out the Thoughtseize, put in the Inquisition, or play all 6, just hand disruption, and that's great. Soul Guiding Lantern, I have one here, namely because sometimes cards like Goldblink or Ashiot doesn't do anything on your opponent's turn, and they dump like Phoenix on their turn, and they, are going to try to revive it. Having a Lantern on the board to kind of serve as a threat is good. In Modern, I think I use Spell Bomb, which is similar to Soul Guiding Lantern, but you get to both exile their grave and draw a card. Here you can only choose to do one or the other, to exile or draw, and so I think just one is good. I don't think you need to play more than one. I guess you could play 2 if you want to see more of it often. I know some decks are playing Darcy, or aka Dragon Chandler. They'll play this as kind of a way to circumvent the fact that we don't have Misha's Bauble in the format, and I mean that's kind of cool. You get an artifact in the grave, you draw, whatever, and it also serves to be anti-grave, so that's kind of cool. Yeah, Aethergus, just hate green and red hate. 3 Mystical Dispute. I wanted to have the option of being able to have a really cheap counter spell for to play against other control decks. The idea is, if I'm hitting turn 4, turn 5, I could maybe, instead of casting the Bolus right into a Memory Lapse or a Archmage, I can wait until turn 5, drop him, have maybe a Dispute in hand, just in case, and they can try to counter it. I can dispute it. The Bolus will stick on the board, and they're gonna have to deal with it. They're gonna, to remove this, they're probably gonna have to, double lightning bolt it, or cast Shark Typhoon or something for 4 and try to get rid of it that way. I know Jeskai doesn't really have a great way to remove creatures per se efficiently, unless they're playing like Wrath of God or something like that. Most of them aren't playing those kind of sweepers, at least from what I've seen. So they're gonna have to kind of deal damage to it and kill it some way. I guess they can Magnum Opus, which is another card I guess you can use in this particular deck as Magnum or Magma Opus, I guess. I think it's Magma Opus. I don't know if you have a copy of it. Okay, yeah. So this is the card that makes their deck so good. It deals 4 damage, taps 2, makes a token, all the good stuff. And there's an argument you could technically do this in this deck. Just spend 2 mana, make a token and maybe even use that to drop the bolus on turn 3 even, I guess, if you wanted to do that. So and it works obviously really well with Torrential Gear Hulk. Um, but I wanted to move away from doing that combo because I don't want to focus on that combo. I want to focus on trying to get Croxah out, and just disrupt our opponent's hand by forcing them to discard, um, and things like that. So that's how this deck plays versus my Esper deck. Is that I'm, rather than countering their threats, I'm forcing them to discard it, forcing them to do things like that, and while having to deal with my threats on the board versus me just countering them and playing a Teferi or something like that. So that's the idea. Goldblink, because we're playing so many 3-mana slot cards here, kind of. We have 2 expressives. We have the 5 here, so that's what, 7 cards. Plus, if we were to play these 2 Angers and stuff like that, or Ashiot, I didn't want to clog up my 3-mana slot too much. But Goldblink is really good in slow formats like this. Like I get hit by this and it hurts. Like especially if I'm playing against another black deck and they play Goldblink against me, it gets rid of my entire grave and forces me to discard 2 cards and sets you back quite a bit. And so I like the card. I think 1 copy is okay. You can play 2, or even more, but I think here is okay because I have just so much of this, and I don't want to really dilute my 3-mana slot too much. Anger of the Gods, you can play Cryocanarium. Cryocanarium is actually easier to cast in this deck than Anger of the God is. But Anger of the God is great for just dealing with most boards. It might, like against elves and things like that, it will kill most things, even if they get pumped up by another elf or something like that. It should be able to handle it for the most part. And unfortunately, it doesn't kill. Doesn't really answer graveyard stuff like cat and stuff. Like cat, they can just sacrifice it and you won't be able to remove it, unlike Cry of Canarium here. But yeah, that's what our Goldblinks, Lanterns, and our Ashiots are for. So yeah, Ashiot serves 2 purposes here: Antigrave and also to mill ourselves to feed the Croxah. So pretty good card, I'd say, but being 3 mana might be a little expensive, and so we'll have to try that out to see if it works or not. Not super great in Historic either. It's better in Modern, but it's expensive in Modern. For 3 mana to exile someone's grave is kind of expensive in Modern. But the reason why I say it's better in Modern because of its static ability. Your opponent can't fetch their lands. Same thing here. I mean, I guess it stops Fable Passage, but not too many people I've played against are playing Fable Passage anyways. So there's that, I guess, that static ability there. Last 2 card I have is Extinction Event and Enter the God Eternals. Extinction Event, kind of so-so. I mean, you can play something else. You can play Languish as another good sweeper. But Extinction for like decks that play cards that are indestructible, I guess. It's there for that. Namely, you obviously, most of our threats are even, so it can kind of work sometimes. If your opponent has a bunch of odd threats, you can just call odds, sweep them, and still leave your stuff on the board and be able to go to town. That's why I also like Angers here also, because it doesn't really kill any of our threats. We can play Anger, Bolus will survive, Croxah will survive, and all that, and it will be fine. Where if you play Languish, Languish will kill the Bolus, So yeah, just 1 copy. We'll test it out. We'll test the side deck out when we do get to best of 3. And the last card here is Enter the God Eternals. Mostly against anti-aggro, I guess. Just so you can make a blocker mill yourself, which is great, and also heal yourself. Yeah, I haven't really experimented with this card recently anymore, or since playing Historic. Back when it was World of Spark was still in Standard, this was a great card to have 1 of in your deck, or maybe even 2 of, is to answer their creatures, put a threat out, and keep yourself in the game. The milling effect back then didn't really matter too much, but since we've gotten Croxahs and Earl and things that can escape from the graveyard, it might be relevant. So we'll see how that works. But yeah, so that's the kind of the general overview of the deck. I'll play a couple of games of it in a bit, and we'll see how it works and change up the deck. Probably start off with best of ones. Granted, I don't know if best of ones is a good way to test the deck, but I guess you get quick games in. And we'll see how that works. Anyways, hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you in a bit.